The moment that changed daytime television forever began with 6 words that would end one woman's life as she knew it. Judge Judy Shindlin was sitting behind her bench, sharp as ever, when an HOA president named Linda Peterson opened her mouth and unleashed the kind of arrogance that makes the air itself go still. Cameras were rolling. The audience leaned forward, and within the next 90 seconds, that arrogance would detonate on live TV, leaving Linda's career, reputation, and freedom in ruins. But let's rewind 30 seconds, because before Judge Judy spoke a single word, everyone in that courtroom could already feel something dangerous simmering under the surface. Linda wasn't your average HOA busybody. She was a suburban monarch who had built an empire of fear inside the gated community of Silver Oaks. For 8 years, she'd ruled her neighbors with citations, fines, and threats of foreclosure, punishing anyone who dared plant a flower without her approval. She called herself a guardian of property values. Everyone else called her the neighborhood dictator. Today, she thought she was here to humiliate one of her residents on national television, a retired teacher named Carol Evans, over a petty landscaping dispute. But what Linda didn't know was that Judge Judy's producers had already uncovered the kind of secrets that make even veteran attorneys lose sleep. This wasn't going to be a case about lawn heights or mailbox colors. This was going to be the public execution of entitlement. When the cameras started rolling, Linda smiled with the brittle confidence of someone who'd won too many arguments at HOA meetings. She adjusted her blazer, leaned into the microphone, and interrupted Judge Judy before she could finish her opening statement. "Your Honor," she said with a half-laugh that could curdle milk, "with all due respect, you clearly don't understand how HOA law works." The courtroom gasped. Judge Judy didn't move, didn't blink. She just stared at Linda the way a hawk stares at a field mouse that's wandered too far into the open. That was the exact moment Linda Peterson's life began to unravel. What followed, what millions of viewers would later replay on TikTok, YouTube, and every social platform in existence, was 47 seconds of pure surgical humiliation. But we'll get there soon enough, because to truly appreciate how completely Judge Judy destroyed this woman, you need to understand who Linda was, what she'd done, and why this single courtroom appearance became the moment America finally saw the dark truth about homeowners associations and the petty tyrants who run them. Before we dive into that, make sure you're subscribed, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about a judge and a Karen. It's a story about what happens when unchecked power finally meets someone who refuses to be intimidated. And trust me, when Judge Judy finally speaks, the look on Linda's face will make you believe in karma again. To understand why the showdown between Judge Judy Shindlin and Linda Peterson became the most replayed courtroom clip in daytime TV history, you have to know what led this HOA tyrant to believe she could walk into a nationally televised courtroom and outsmart one of the sharpest legal minds alive. For 8 long years, the residents of Silver Oak subdivision had lived under Linda Peterson's rule. She wasn't just an HOA president, she was a one-woman government who treated community bylaws like holy scripture. Lawn 2 inches too high? Fine. Garage door left open for 10 minutes? Fine. Christmas lights still hanging on December 27th? And other fine neighbors whispered that Linda had turned the HOA into her personal empire, funding weekend spa trips with administrative fees and hiring her nephew's company for overpriced maintenance contracts. But nobody dared challenge her until retired schoolteacher Carol Evans moved in. Carol had spent 32 years teaching high school civics. She believed in rules, fairness, and standing up to bullies. So when Linda issued her a $5,000 fine for painting her mailbox a color that wasn't pre-approved, Carol decided enough was enough. She didn't just fight back. She filed an official complaint accusing Linda of fraudulent accounting, harassment, and abuse of power. The case exploded through the neighborhood like wildfire, dividing Silver Oaks into 2 camps, those terrified of Linda and those praying she'd finally be stopped. When Judge Judy's producers caught wind of it, they reached out to both women. Carol saw an opportunity to expose the corruption that had bled her community dry. Linda saw a stage, a national audience she could lecture about personal responsibility. She accepted instantly, convinced that her polished arrogance and binder of printouts would make her look like the hero. From the moment she stepped into the studio courtroom, Linda acted less like a defendant and more like a CEO arriving at a press conference. She corrected the bailiff. She chatted loudly with producers. She even rehearsed her opening lines in the mirror, unaware that every mic in the room was already recording. What Linda didn't realize was that Judge Judy had come prepared. Overnight, her research team had compiled a dossier thicker than a law textbook. Financial reports, resident complaints, even a notarized affidavit from a former HOA treasurer who'd resigned after discovering thousands of dollars missing from the community fund. So when Linda took her seat that morning, smiling like someone about to teach a class on superiority, she was already sitting on a powder keg of her own making. This case wasn't about paint or mailboxes anymore. It was about what happens when small-town power meets real accountability. The cameras zoomed in on Judge Judy as she adjusted her glasses, reading over the preliminary notes. A single eyebrow lifted, her universal signal that someone in that courtroom was about to regret every decision that brought them there. And in less than 15 minutes, Linda Peterson would discover that this wasn't her HOA meeting. This was Judge Judy's court, and the rules here weren't written to protect bullies. They were written to expose them. It started, like most HOA nightmares, with something so trivial it almost felt impossible that it could ruin lives. A mailbox. Carol Evans had repainted hers light blue, a soft, cheerful color that reminded her of the skies over her hometown in Montana. But in the bylaws of Silver Oaks, approved mailbox colors were limited to forest green, black, or brown. Linda Peterson considered Carol's pastel blue box a visual contamination of community standards. She issued a written warning within 24 hours. When Carol didn't immediately repaint it, Linda added a $100 fine. Then $250, then $500. By the end of the third week, the penalty had climbed to $5,000, more than Carol's monthly pension check. It would have ended there if Linda hadn't gone one step further. She ordered a private towing company to remove Carol's car from her driveway, claiming non-compliance with HOA directives, and placed a lien on Carol's home. It was an act so outrageous that even the usually timid neighbors started whispering. Some called it abuse, others called it blackmail. But Carol, the soft-spoken retired teacher, didn't crumble. She took her stack of violation letters, her payment receipts, and the HOA's bylaw book, and filed a complaint through small claims court. When the producers of Judge Judy contacted her, she hesitated, until Linda herself posted on the community Facebook page that she was going to embarrass Carol on live TV. That was the moment Carol decided she wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for everyone Linda had bullied. The taping was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in Los Angeles. Linda flew out 2 days early, first class, courtesy of the HOA's community outreach budget. Carol took a red-eye flight and paid for her ticket out of her savings. When the two women arrived at the studio, Dave and the producers could feel the tension. Carol quietly reviewed her documents, while Linda barked orders at assistants and demanded bottled water at exactly 68 degrees. The production assistant later said, "She acted like we were the staff at her country club." But Linda wasn't nervous. She had her plan. A binder stuffed with printed legal precedents, most of them copied from blogs and amateur HOA forums. She believed she'd walk out of that courtroom with a victory, a bigger reputation, and maybe even a book deal. What she didn't know was that Judge Judy's team had already confirmed a paper trail, a set of bank transfers showing HOA funds wired directly to Linda's personal account. The money trail wasn't just incriminating. It was devastating. The staff could sense that Judy was waiting for the perfect moment to drop it. But first, she wanted to let Linda dig her own grave. As cameras began rolling, Judy gave her trademark introduction, the kind that made millions lean forward on their couches. "This is Judge Judy, real cases, real people, real justice." The bailiff called the case Evans versus Peterson. Carol stood calm, holding her folder against her chest like a shield. Linda strutted to the defendant's podium, smiling confidently at the audience. She had no idea the next 15 minutes would destroy everything she'd built, and that the person swinging the hammer wasn't a lawyer, but a Brooklyn judge who'd spent her entire career taking down bullies exactly like her. The courtroom lights were bright, the cameras rolling, and Linda Peterson was in her element. She adjusted her pearl necklace, smiled at the audience, and prepared to deliver the performance of her life, a performance she believed would cement her as the ultimate defender of neighborhood order. Judge Judy began with her usual calm authority. "Mrs. Peterson, the plaintiff alleges that you abused your power as HOA president to impose unlawful fines and liens on her property. How do you respond?" Linda laughed, and actually laughed on national television. "Your Honor," she began, her tone condescendingly sweet, "with all due respect, this woman has no understanding of how homeowners associations operate. I've been president for 8 years, and I know our community bylaws inside and out. Everything I did was entirely within my legal authority. Frankly, if she'd followed the rules like everyone else, we wouldn't be here wasting your valuable time." Judge Judy tilted her head slightly, the way a lioness does when deciding whether to pounce now or wait until the prey finishes talking. "You'll get your chance to explain the rules," she said coolly. "For now, I'd like to hear from Mrs. Evans." Carol's voice was quiet but steady. "Your Honor, I didn't break any rule. I checked the bylaws. Nowhere does it say you can't repaint your mailbox, and I filed the form requesting color approval. Mrs. Peterson never responded. She just started sending fines." Linda interrupted before Carol could finish. "That's not true. She knows the process. I don't have time to handhold every resident who doesn't read the bylaws. These people think, Mrs. Peterson!" Judge Judy's voice cracked like a whip. The audience jumped. Linda blinked, visibly startled. "You do not interrupt in my courtroom. You'll have your turn to speak, and when you do, you'll do it without condescension. Are we clear?" "Yes, Your Honor," Linda muttered, her jaw tightening. But humility wasn't in Linda's vocabulary. The second Judy turned her attention back to Carol, Linda rolled her eyes so dramatically it could have been seen from space. The camera zoomed in on her face, the smirk, the dismissive glance, the unspoken, "This judge doesn't scare me." The internet would later freeze-frame that exact expression, turning it into 1,000 memes titled, "The Moment She Knew." Judge Judy continued, her tone clinical. "Mrs. Evans, do you have evidence that you submitted the form?" Carol held up a stamped copy. "Certified mail, Your Honor." "Signed by Mrs. Peterson herself," the audience murmured. Linda's smile faltered for the briefest moment, then returned. "That doesn't prove anything," she snapped. "She probably forged it. People lie all the time, especially the ones who think the rules don't apply to them." Judge Judy leaned back slowly, her eyes narrowing. "Are you suggesting the plaintiff forged your signature?" Linda shrugged, waving her hand dismissively. "Who knows? You can't trust everyone these days. That's why communities need strong leadership." The arrogance was breathtaking. The complete inability to recognize that every word she spoke was making her look worse. "Judge." Judy's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Mrs. Peterson, I've been on the bench for over 40 years. I've seen liars, cheaters, and con artists of every kind. But what I see in you isn't just arrogance, it's contempt for the truth. You think you're above accountability?" Linda smiled tightly. "No, Your Honor, I just am accountability. Someone has to enforce standards. People like her bring down property values." That line, "people like her," hit the courtroom like a gunshot. The audience gasped. Carol's face fell. Judge Judy's hand paused mid-air as she adjusted her glasses. Her tone turned icy. "People like her?" she repeated, every syllable dripping with danger. Linda stammered, realizing too late that she'd just crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I just meant, people who don't fit the neighborhood." Judge Judy's eyes locked onto her with the kind of look that could burn through steel. The silence stretched for several painful seconds. "Mrs. Peterson," she said finally, her voice low but lethal, "Feo just told on yourself." That was the moment everyone in the courtroom knew. Judge Judy wasn't just going to rule against Linda, she was going to dismantle her. Piece by piece. Long before Linda Peterson strutted into that studio courtroom, Judge Judy's research team had already been busy. Every episode of Judge Judy looked spontaneous, but the truth is that her producers work like investigative reporters. They verify documents, call witnesses, and cross-check every statement the litigants make before the cameras ever roll. And when Linda's name came across their desks, alarms went off. The first red flag was a financial anomaly. quarterly HOA statements showing miscellaneous administrative expenditures that didn't match the association's bank withdrawals. A deeper look uncovered transfers from the HOA's operating account into a personal checking account in Linda Peterson's name. Small at first, a few $100s for community marketing, $1,000 for holiday event coordination. Then larger ones, $4,800 for grounds improvement consulting. All without invoices, all signed by Linda. The second red flag came from the people who knew her best. 3 former board members contacted separately, all told the same story. Linda had bullied them into resigning. She forged signatures on meeting minutes, manipulated votes, and even threatened one treasurer with a lawsuit for defamation when he questioned the missing money. Every one of those statements was waiting neatly organized in a manila folder on Judge Judy's bench the morning of the taping. The third red flag was personal. A producer located an anonymous complaint from a Silver Oaks resident filed 2 years earlier, a complaint that never went anywhere because the local county clerk lost it. It described a pattern of harassment that matched Carol Evans's experience exactly: sudden fines, escalating fees, and retaliatory property assessments whenever residents questioned authority. So when Judge Judy looked over at Linda in that courtroom, she wasn't just seeing another arrogant HOA president. She was looking at a repeat abuser of power who had finally wandered into a place she couldn't control. And Judy had a plan. She wasn't going to open with accusations or reveal her evidence too soon. No, she was going to let Linda's ego dig the deepest hole possible. Then, when the arrogance reached its peak, she'd drop the facts one by one like depth charges. That's why Judy's first questions were deceptively mild. How long have you served as HOA president? What's your process for issuing fines? How are community funds managed? Each answer Linda gave built her self-portrait: competent, disciplined, in charge. Each one also set the stage for Judy's counterpunch. When Linda bragged about running balanced budgets, Judy quietly slid the first page of the financial report toward the edge of her bench. When Linda declared that all fines were documented and approved by the board, Judy tapped the affidavit from the former treasurer, who swore otherwise. Bailiff Bird, ever the professional, sensed what was coming. He'd seen that look before. The faint smirk in Judy's eyes that meant the trap was armed and ready. While Linda continued lecturing about community integrity, Judy leaned back, her pen tapping lightly against the folder marked Exhibit C, Financial Discrepancies. To the untrained eye, she looked bored. To anyone who knew her, it was the calm before the storm. Every camera in that room was capturing history in slow motion, a woman who'd built an empire on intimidation, standing in front of someone who could destroy her with 3 sentences, and the judge was just getting warmed up. The studio courtroom looked ordinary: mahogany bench, flag, the soft hum of cameras, but the atmosphere had changed. The audience could feel that something big was coming. It wasn't just another petty small claims case anymore. It was the calm before a televised thunderstorm. Judge Judy sat motionless behind her bench, glasses resting low on her nose, a single yellow legal pad in front of her. Each time Linda Peterson opened her mouth, Judy's pen made one short, deliberate line, an invisible countdown to detonation. Across the aisle, Carol Evans sat with her hands folded neatly on the table, eyes lowered but calm. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't angry. She just looked tired, like a woman who'd spent years being pushed around and was finally about to see gravity reverse. Linda, on the other hand, was in full performance mode. She kept turning toward the cameras when she spoke, trying to project confidence, even charm. To the viewing audience, she wanted to look like a misunderstood professional just trying to do her job. But inside that room, her energy told another story: jittery eyes, tapping fingers, a nervous laugh that came a half-second too late. The audience, mostly retirees and law students, could smell the arrogance. Murmurs rippled through the rows each time Linda cut Judy off mid-sentence. Bailiff Bird cleared his throat once, a low warning that usually made most defendants sit down and stay quiet. Linda didn't even notice. She was too busy explaining how people without experience in governance often misinterpreted HOA statutes. Judge Judy's pen stopped moving. She looked up slowly. "Mrs. Peterson," she said, voice perfectly level, Do you realize you've interrupted me 7 times in less than 5 minutes? Linda blinked, startled. I just thought you might appreciate context, Your Honor. Context, Judy repeated, leaning forward. That's what liars use when they run out of facts. A collective ooh rolled through the audience. For the first time, Linda hesitated. Her hands twitched toward her binder, but she couldn't seem to open it. The camera zoomed closer. Even under layers of makeup, a faint sheen of sweat had begun to form at her hairline. Judge Judy sat back again, letting the silence do the work. She'd learned decades ago that silence was a scalpel, sharper than shouting, more devastating than insults. The longer she waited, the more uncomfortable people became and the more the guilty revealed themselves. "Let's review your own words," Judy finally said, tapping the folder beside her. "You testified that all financial transactions were approved by your board, correct?" Linda nodded quickly. "Yes, of course." "Good." Judy slid a document forward. "Then perhaps you can explain why 3 former board members, each of whom resigned during your tenure, state under oath that they never approved the expenditures listed here." The audience leaned forward. The rustle of paper was the only sound. Linda stared at the document, her mouth opening and closing. That must be a misunderstanding. They're disgruntled. You know how people are when they lose elections." Judy didn't respond. She just kept staring, pen poised. The room felt smaller by the second. Cameras whirred softly, catching every blink, every twitch, every failed smirk. Outside that tiny set, millions of viewers would later describe this moment as the shift, the instant when entertainment turned into reckoning. Inside, everyone sensed it. The arrogance that had ruled a neighborhood was finally cornered by a woman who'd spent her life dismantling arrogance for breakfast, and Judge Judy hadn't even opened the damning envelope yet. Before, Judge Judy tore into Linda Peterson's empire. She wanted the audience, and Linda herself, to remember what all of this was really about. Not rules, not property values, not bylaws, people. "Mrs. Evans," Judy said, turning toward the plaintiff's table, her tone softening just enough to draw a contrast. "Tell me what life has been like in your neighborhood under this woman's leadership." Carol Evans took a slow breath. The retired teacher's hands shook slightly as she unfolded a letter, its creases worn white from being handled too often. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady but fragile. "I moved to Silver Oaks after my husband passed. It was supposed to be peaceful. I just wanted a garden, somewhere to sit with my coffee in the mornings. I didn't know one person could make an entire neighborhood afraid to open their blinds. You could hear a pin drop. Even the bailiff stood a little straighter." Carol continued. "Within the first month, I got 5 violation notices. 1 for leaving my trash bin out too long. 1 because my mailbox wasn't the right shade of green. Then when I asked for clarification, she fined me again for being confrontational." Judge Judy's eyebrows lifted. "She fined you for asking a question?" Carol nodded. "Every time I tried to talk to her, she raised her voice and said, 'I am the rules.'" The audience let out a collective murmur. Somewhere in the back row, a woman whispered, "Unbelievable." Carol reached into a small folder. "I started keeping a log," she said, passing it to Bird, who carried it to the bench. Inside were dates, times, and copies of emails, dozens of them. Each message more aggressive than the last, each signed respectfully Linda Peterson, HOA President. Judy flipped through the pages quickly, her jaw tightening. "Mrs. Peterson, did you write these?" Linda crossed her arms. "They're official communications, yes. Nothing inappropriate about them." "Nothing inappropriate?" Judy repeated, holding up one email. "Residents who can't afford to follow our standards should consider moving to neighborhoods that match their income level." "That's appropriate." Linda's mouth twitched. "It's about maintaining property values, Your Honor." Judy lowered the page slowly, the way a teacher lowers a test paper before delivering a lecture that will be remembered forever. "Mrs. Peterson, you were a teacher once, weren't you, Mrs. Evans?" Carol nodded. 32 years. Then you understand better than most what happens when someone in power decides the rules only apply one way." Carol's voice cracked. "I had students who used to hide from bullies. I never thought I'd be hiding from one at my age." That line hit the room like a hammer. The audience gasped. Someone in the second row wiped away tears. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in closer, catching the tremor in Carol's voice. Judge Judy set the folder down and looked directly at Linda. "You turned a retirement community into a fiefdom. And you did it to people who couldn't fight back. Linda tried to smile, but it came out wrong, a twitch instead of confidence. I was just enforcing order. No, Judy said quietly. You were enforcing yourself. The silence that followed was heavy, electric. Everyone in that room knew they were watching something bigger than a lawsuit. It was a reckoning between ordinary decency and weaponized authority. And while Linda still thought she could argue her way out, Judge Judy had already decided it was time to show the world exactly what kind of person she was dealing with. The storm was about to break. Every long-time viewer of Judge Judy knows that moment, when her patience evaporates and the temperature in the room drops 10 degrees. It started with a small motion, Judy setting her pen down. A quiet click that made even the cameras seem to hold their breath. "Mrs. Peterson," she said evenly, "I want you to look at me." Linda looked up, still trying to wear that brittle smile. "Good. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to confirm a few details about the HOA's finances." Linda's eyes flicked to her binder. "Of course, Your Honor. Everything's transparent. I have all the reports right here." "I'm sure you do," Judy replied. "Unfortunately for you, so do I." The bailiff handed over a manila envelope, the one every Judge Judy fan recognizes as the beginning of the end. Judy slid out a document and read aloud. "Wire transfer dated April 14th, $2,000 from the Silver Oaks Operating Fund to an account ending in 1397. That account belongs to Linda Peterson." Linda's smile froze. "That was reimbursement. I paid for landscaping out of pocket." "Really?" Judy interrupted, flipping to the next page. "Because the same landscaping company you claim to have paid says no such job was ever completed, and that invoice number doesn't exist," the audience murmured. Linda laughed weakly. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove anything." "Oh, I don't need to," Judy said, voice sharpening. "You already did." She tapped the document. "You signed this transfer authorization yourself. No board approval, no receipt, no record of services rendered." "That's embezzlement, Mrs. Peterson." The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Linda's eyes darted toward the cameras. "This is a misunderstanding." "Sit down." It wasn't a shout, but the command hit like a physical force. Linda sank back into her chair, color draining from her face. "Let me explain something to you," Judy continued, leaning forward. "When you hold authority, any authority, you don't get to use it as a piggy bank. You don't get to humiliate your neighbors because you enjoy control. You serve them. You protect them. You don't punish them for existing." Linda opened her mouth to speak, but Judy cut her off again. "Don't. Every word you say right now is another nail in the coffin of your credibility." For a long moment, the courtroom was completely silent, except for the faint hum of the lights overhead. Then Judy did something that would turn this episode into one of the most shared clips in Judge Judy history. She turned toward Carol Evans. "Mrs. Evans, I want you to stand up, please." Carol rose. "Uncertain. Look at this woman," Judy said, gesturing toward Linda. "For years she's treated you as if you were beneath her. She called you names, fined you into debt, and made you feel powerless. Well, you're not powerless anymore." The audience broke into spontaneous applause before the bailiff's raised hand restored order. "Now," Judy said, turning back to Linda, "you said a moment ago that people like Mrs. Evans don't fit your neighborhood. I'd like you to explain exactly what you meant by that." Linda swallowed hard. I just meant people who don't maintain standards." "Standards," Judy repeated. "That's convenient, because according to the county records I have here, your own property has 3 unresolved code violations: overgrown hedges, broken porch railing, and an unpermitted deck. So whose standards are we talking about, Mrs. Peterson?" The color drained completely from Linda's face. Judy leaned back, her tone deceptively calm. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop talking, you're going to listen, and you're going to learn how accountability feels." The cameras zoomed in on Linda's trembling hands. The mighty HOA president, who once controlled an entire neighborhood, now looked small, cornered and exposed. And for the first time that day, she understood. Judge Judy wasn't just questioning her conduct, she was dismantling her entire identity. The papers rustled like thunder. Judge Judy held the manila folder upright so the studio lights flashed off its brass clasp. Television shorthand for the receipts are coming. "Mrs. Peterson," she began, tone calm but razor sharp, "every decision you've made for 8 years is in this folder. I'm going to give you one opportunity to tell the truth before I read aloud what's inside. Do you want to amend any part of your testimony?" Linda tried to muster a smile. "I have nothing to hide." Judy nodded once. "Good. Then let's start with Exhibit A." She lifted the first sheet. "Email from you to the HOA treasurer dated February 3rd. Quote, transfer the maintenance surplus to my personal account. I'll reimburse after I finish the vendor negotiations." Unquote. The amount, $3,000, never returned. Linda opened her mouth, but Judy kept going. Exhibit B, signed statement from the same treasurer. "President Peterson instructed me to falsify the minutes to make the transfer appear authorized." "That, Mrs. Peterson, is falsification of records." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Bird folded his arms. He'd seen hundreds of defendants wilt under that tone. Exhibit C, Judy continued, voice rising only slightly. "Letter from resident Henry Cho describing threats you made after he refused to pay an invented decor compliance. Fine. You wrote, and I quote, 'If you don't like it, I can make your life very difficult.' Sound familiar?" Linda's hands were gripping the podium now, knuckles white. "Those are taken out of context, Your Honor. Everyone exaggerates in emails." "Context again," Judy said almost gently. "You really should retire that word. It's not saving you." She turned to the last page. Exhibit D, County Bank record, showing a cashier's check from the Silver Oaks account, deposited into a private investment fund labeled LP Home Improvements. "Would you like to guess whose initials those are?" Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. "Mine." "Correct," Judy said. "Congratulations, you finally told the truth." The audience laughed nervously, then fell silent as Judy continued. "Now, you're going to tell me why a community president with fiduciary responsibility diverted association funds into her own investment portfolio. And remember, you're under oath." Linda's throat worked, but no words came. The cameras caught every blink, every shallow breath. "Let me save you the trouble," Judy said, leaning forward. "You did it because you thought no one would ever check. Because you built a tiny kingdom and convinced yourself the rules that applied to everyone else stopped at your front door. You used fear as a business model, Mrs. Peterson. That ends today." For several long seconds, nothing moved. Then Judy slid the folder aside and looked directly into the lens, speaking not just to Linda but to millions watching at home. "This," she said, "is what abuse of power looks like. Ordinary people paying the price so one person can feel important." Linda covered her face with her hands. The woman who once fined her neighbors for crooked mailboxes was now trembling on national television. Judy straightened her robe. "Mrs. Evans," she said, "you can sit down. I think we've heard enough." Then she turned back to Linda one final time. "You said earlier that people like Mrs. Evans don't fit your community. I disagree. It's people like you who don't fit civilized society." The gavel came down once, hard. The audience erupted. Cameras zoomed in on Linda's stunned expression, eyes wide, mouth open, realizing she had just been exposed not only as a bully, but as a thief. For 5 full seconds, nothing in the courtroom moved. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Linda Peterson stood frozen at the defendant's table, blinking like a light that had just short-circuited. The binder she'd clutched since the opening statement slid from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud that echoed through the studio. The sound felt final, like the closing of a door she could never reopen. Judge Judy said nothing. She just watched. That, longtime viewers would later say, was the most terrifying part. The silence. Linda's breathing quickened. "Your Honor, please. This is being blown out of proportion." "Stop," Judy said quietly. The single word landed harder than a shout. Linda tried again, voice trembling. "I didn't mean to. It was just stop." 2 words this time. The bailiff didn't move. The audience didn't breathe. And Linda finally did what no one had ever seen her do. She stopped talking. Judge Judy leaned forward, elbows on the bench. "When you talk, you lie. So for the next few moments, you're going to listen." The pause stretched. Cameras zoomed in, catching every flicker of panic behind Linda's eyes. Makeup that had looked flawless under the studio lights now streaked faintly along her cheek. The HOA president, who'd once strutted through neighborhood board meetings dictating lawn heights and mailbox colors, now looked small, almost childlike, standing in front of the most feared judge on television. "This," Judy said softly, is what accountability sounds like. Nothing, no gavel, no rustling paper. Just the heavy quiet of a woman confronting the weight of every rule she'd ever twisted. Linda's lip trembled. "I was only trying to keep order," she whispered. Judy didn't answer. She just tilted her head, a gesture that said everything. "You finally heard yourself." The audience could feel the shift, the arrogance evaporating, the panic setting in. Every second of silence was a mirror Linda couldn't look away from. Finally she broke. Her shoulders collapsed inward, and the words tumbled out in broken fragments. "I thought, if I didn't control everything, people would take advantage. I just wanted them to respect me." Judy's response was quiet but lethal. "Respect isn't taken, it's earned. You mistook fear for respect, and now you're learning the difference." The sentence hung in the air like a verdict long before the gavel fell. For 45 seconds, there was only the sound of Linda's muffled crying. Carol Evans sat still, hands folded, watching the woman who had terrorized her neighbors come undone. Even the audience didn't clap. They just watched, humbled by the rawness of it. Judge Judy waited until the sobs slowed, then spoke again, voice steady as steel. "Wipe your face, Mrs. Peterson. We're not finished." The cameras captured her looking up, eyes red, and mascara streaked, just as Judy reached for the final document that would seal her fate. The silence was over. Judgment was coming. Judge Judy lifted the final sheet of paper from her folder and flattened it against the bench. Every movement was deliberate, methodical, surgical. The room felt like the moments before a lightning strike. Charged. Silent, inevitable. "Mrs. Peterson," she began, "I've reviewed every statement, every transaction, and every complaint submitted to this court. And after hearing your testimony," she paused, letting the air grow heavy again, "I am convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that you are unfit to lead anything, let alone a community." Linda's chin quivered. "Your Honor, please, Judy raised a single finger. "Don't interrupt me. You've had your say for 8 years straight. Now you'll listen." She turned to the clerk. "Enter judgment in favor of the plaintiff, Carol Evans, for full damages, $18,700 for financial losses, $7,500 for emotional distress, and an additional $10,000 in punitive damages against the defendant for willful misconduct and abuse of authority." The audience gasped. That was one of the largest awards in the show's history. Linda's knees wobbled. $26,000. That's insane. "You can't—" "Watch me," Judy snapped. Then she looked straight into Linda's eyes. "You thought you could play dictator because no one would stop you. But in my courtroom you answer for every bully you ever silenced, every fine you ever weaponized, and every neighbor you ever humiliated." Her tone softened, not with mercy, but with finality. "You called people like Mrs. Evans low class, didn't you?" Linda hesitated. Answer the question." "Yes?" "Then listen carefully," Judy said, voice cold as stone. "There is nothing lower class about kindness, empathy, or decency. What's low is greed disguised as order. What's low is cruelty justified as discipline. What's low is someone like you who mistakes control for competence." The courtroom stayed still, caught in the gravity of her words. "Do you know what makes neighborhoods strong, Mrs. Peterson?" Judy continued. "Not rules. Not fines, respect, real respect, earned through fairness, honesty, and service. Everything you've done here was the opposite." Linda wiped her eyes, shaking her head. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Intent doesn't erase impact," Judy said sharply. "You turned a community into a prison. Now it's your turn to face consequences." She leaned back, letting the words sink in. "In addition to the monetary judgment, this court recommends that the HOA of Silver Oaks convene an emergency vote to permanently remove Mrs. Peterson from all leadership positions, effective immediately. A certified copy of these findings will be sent to the State Housing Authority for further review." Linda's mouth fell open. "You can't." "I can," Judy said simply, "and I just did." The gavel came down once, final, absolute. The sound rang like a thunderclap through the studio. It wasn't just the end of a case. It was the collapse of an empire built on fear. The audience erupted. Cheers, applause, the cathartic roar of justice finally catching up. Carol Evans covered her mouth, tears of relief glinting under the studio lights. Judge Judy waited for the noise to settle before turning to Carol. "Mrs. Evans, You just reminded a lot of people what courage looks like. You stood up to a bully and won. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small again. Carol nodded, voice breaking. Thank you, Your Honor. Judy looked back at Linda one last time. Mrs. Peterson, if you're smart, you'll use this moment to start over. Because if you ever treat another person the way you treated your neighbors, I guarantee the next judge you meet won't be as patient. Then, with one last flick of her gavel hand, she dismissed the case. We're done here. The cameras followed as the bailiff escorted Linda out, shoulders slumped, mascara streaked, her once pristine binder left forgotten on the floor. The Queen of Silver Oaks had been dethroned, and Judge Judy hadn't just ruled against her. She'd dismantled her piece by piece, until the whole country could see exactly who she was. The episode hadn't even finished airing before clips of the courtroom explosion went viral. Within hours, hashtags like Judge Judy Justice, and accountability served were trending worldwide. Every news outlet, from local stations to national talk shows, replayed the same 47-second highlight. The moment Judge Judy said, "You mistook fear for respect." It was quoted, remixed, and shared millions of times. Comment sections lit up with people saying the same thing. Finally, someone stood up to a bully and won. For the residents of Silver Oaks, the fallout was immediate and cathartic. 2 days after the ruling, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. It wasn't held in the community clubhouse where Linda had reigned for 8 long years. No, this one took place outdoors, on the green space she had once forbidden children from playing on. Dozens of residents gathered, some bringing lawn chairs, others just standing together, united for the first time in years without fear. When the motion to remove Linda Peterson from her position came up, the vote was unanimous. The new board was led by, of course, Carol Evans. Her first act as president was simple but symbolic. She announced the removal of every arbitrary fine Linda had ever imposed. Over the following weeks, she helped refund nearly $42,000 in improper penalties collected under Linda's administration. For the first time, Silver Oaks became what it had always promised to be: a community. Neighbors started greeting each other again. Children played in the cul-de-sacs without being told their laughter was too disruptive. Front porches were decorated with flowers and flags that reflected personality instead of uniformity. But the story didn't end at the neighborhood. A week after the episode aired, state investigators confirmed they were opening a formal review into Linda Peterson's financial handling of HOA funds. The documentation Judge Judy had unveiled, those wire transfers and falsified minutes, were forwarded to the Attorney General's office. It turned out Judy's judgment had done more than entertain television audiences. It had triggered a real criminal inquiry. For Linda, life unraveled quickly. She resigned in disgrace, her savings drained by restitution and legal fees. The smug confidence that once defined her had been replaced by something she'd never shown before: silence. Her house, the biggest one on the block, sat dark for weeks before a for sale sign appeared in the yard. No one came to her farewell meeting. Meanwhile, Carol Evans found herself the unlikely face of national conversations about HOA reform. Morning talk shows invited her to speak about her experience. Lawmakers cited the case as an example of the need for transparency and accountability in homeowner associations. It wasn't about revenge, Carol said during one interview. It was about fairness. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. Back in the Silver Oaks clubhouse, that quote was printed on a plaque and hung beside the community bulletin, board where violation notices used to be posted. Judge Judy's team received thousands of letters from viewers, thanking her for exposing the abuse of small-scale power. The show's producers later revealed that the HOA Karen episode broke viewership records, reaching nearly 14 million households in its first week. But perhaps the most telling aftermath came months later, when Carol received a handwritten letter in the mail. The return address, Linda Peterson. It was only 3 sentences long. You were right. I didn't understand what respect meant until I lost it. I'm sorry. Carol folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer, not out of hatred but closure, because for the first time in years she finally felt peace. And as for Judge Judy, she moved on to the next case like she always did, unshaken, unbothered, and absolutely undefeated. When the credits rolled that night, millions of viewers sat in stunned silence. Not because the verdict was shocking, but because it was satisfying. It wasn't just about an HOA or a lawsuit. It was about something every viewer had felt at least once in their lives. The frustration of watching someone abuse authority and finally, seeing them face consequences. What made this story viral wasn't the shouting, or the money, or even the 47 seconds of stunned silence that followed Judge Judy's final words. It was the universal truth behind them. Fear isn't respect, and control isn't leadership. Judge Judy had seen it 1,000 times, from scammers, narcissists and self-proclaimed experts who mistook volume for victory. But Linda Peterson was a special kind of cautionary tale. She represented every overbearing boss, every neighborhood tyrant, every person who hides cruelty behind a smile and calls it order. And when Judy looked her in the eyes and said, "You mistook fear for respect," it wasn't just a line for television. It was a mirror, and for everyone watching, to ask themselves, am I leading through fairness or through fear? The clip didn't just entertain people. It started conversations in workplaces, schools and communities about power, ego and humility. Social media comments flooded in. "I showed this to my boss and he needed it. Our HOA president should watch this before every meeting. This gave me courage to speak up." And that's the beauty of Judge Judy's courtroom. It isn't just a stage for justice. It's a reflection of life itself. Because at its core, this story isn't about a woman who lost a lawsuit. It's about every person who forgets that leadership without empathy is just dictatorship with better PR. It's about how arrogance collapses when faced with truth, and how truth, no matter how delayed, always wins. Judy has said it many times before, but never has it felt more true than in this case. If you live dishonestly, justice will find you, whether in a courtroom or in your conscience. And that's exactly what happened. Linda Peterson's downfall wasn't about money or public humiliation. It was about exposure. For years she hid behind bylaws, paperwork and fake smiles. But you can't out-talk evidence, and you can't outsmart integrity. So when that gavel came down and the world cheered, it wasn't just applause for Judy. It was relief. Relief that arrogance can fall, that kindness can win, and that even the smallest act of courage, like one woman standing up to a bully, can ripple into millions of lives. If you're watching this and you've ever dealt with a Karen who thought rules only applied to others, or a boss who thought cruelty was strength, or an authority figure who used power to push people down, hit that like button right now. Because this story proved something the world needed to remember. No matter how powerful someone thinks they are, there's always someone braver, wiser and stronger ready to remind them. Respect is earned, not demanded. So what did we really witness here? A courtroom case? Sure, but it was also something deeper. A reckoning between arrogance and accountability, ego and evidence, fear and truth. Linda Peterson walked into that courtroom believing she was untouchable, that titles, bylaws and fake confidence could shield her from the truth. But Judge Judy reminded her and everyone watching that justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs facts, patience, and the courage to say, enough. In just under an hour, Judy dismantled 8 years of manipulation, one sentence at a time. And the moment she dropped that final line, "You mistook fear for respect," the internet didn't just applaud, it exhaled. Because we all know someone like Linda Peterson. Someone who mistakes intimidation for intelligence. Someone who confuses control with competence. Someone who thinks power is a personality trait. But this story, this episode, proved something the world desperately needed to see. Power without empathy always destroys itself. Carol Evans didn't just win a lawsuit. She reclaimed her voice, her peace, and her community. She showed the world that one brave person can stand up to tyranny, even if that tyranny hides behind HOA paperwork and a fake smile. And Judge Judy. She reminded millions why she's more than a TV icon. She's the embodiment of earned authority, sharp, fair, fearless. Let's be honest, there's a little bit of Linda Peterson in a lot of people. We all crave control sometimes. We all think we're right. But the real question is, when you have power, do you use it to build people up or break them down? If you've ever dealt with someone like Linda, an HOA tyrant, a workplace bully, or a Karen who thinks rules don't apply to her, drop a comment below and tell me your story. How did you stand up for yourself? How did justice finally catch up? And if you believe that accountability is the ultimate equalizer, smash that like button, subscribe for more true justice stories, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next takedown of arrogance and entitlement. Because here on this channel, every week we expose the moments when power collapses and truth takes its place. Whether it's HOA nightmares, courtroom showdowns, or the ultimate Karen meltdowns, we're not just telling stories, we're reminding the world that no matter how loud arrogance gets, integrity always speaks louder. So until next time, respect others, stand your ground, and remember, when life puts a Karen in your path, channel your inner Judge Judy and let justice do the talking.